In the heart of the golden plains of Tembera, where the wind carried the scent of dust and palm wine, the people believed the drums could speak to the ancestors. Every evening when the sun slipped behind the red hills, the villagers gathered in the great square to listen. The sacred drums, carved from the trees of the riverbank, were said to hold the voices of the old spirits, and when they beat, the air shimmered with the pulse of something older than time itself. Among the drummers none shone brighter than Asha. She was young, with eyes like dawn and hands that moved faster than sight. Her rhythm was not learned, it was born in her like a heartbeat from another world. When she played, children stopped crying, warriors lowered their spears, and even the river seemed to listen. Her laughter carried the same magic as her music, pure, untamed, and alive. The elders often whispered that she was chosen by the ancestors, that her soul was bound to the drum long before her birth. But not everyone in Tembera loved her gift. Watching from the shadows of the chieftain's hut was Zuri, Asha's stepmother, a woman of beauty sharpened by envy. Once she had been the village's greatest dancer, her movements worshipped, her name sung in praise. But ever since Asha had grown, the village no longer called for Zuri's dances. The rhythm they wanted now came from the hands of a girl half her age. The praise that once filled Zuri's nights had turned to silence, and silence, to her, was poison. Zuri began to see Asha not as a girl but as a threat, a spirit too powerful, too bright. "She stirs what should rest," Zuri would hiss to the king, Asha's father. "There are powers in rhythm that should not wake. Her drums summon the unseen." The king, weary and easily swayed, would nod but say nothing. He loved his daughter, but he feared what he could not understand. The elders spoke of balance, that where there was too much voice, silence would demand its turn. Asha, unaware of the storm forming around her, played on. She taught the children the soft beats that called the rain, and the hunters the deep tones that brought luck. Her laughter became a rhythm in itself, echoing through the palm trees. She loved Zuri as best as she could, despite the cold stares and sharp words. In her heart, she believed that even hatred could be softened by music, that rhythm could heal all things. But Zuri's jealousy was not a wound that could heal. It was a flame that grew each time Asha's name was spoken with joy. She began to see signs where there were none, the clouds moving oddly when Asha played, the birds gathering when she sang. "She controls the spirits," Zuri whispered to anyone who would listen. "Her songs are not blessings. They are commands." The whispers began to grow roots. Some villagers began to fear Asha's power, unsure if her gift came from light or shadow. One evening when the festival of the ancestors arrived, Asha stood in the center of the square, her hands ready over the largest drum of Tembera. The moon hung low and the people gathered to listen. When her palms struck the hide, the sound rolled like thunder. The earth seemed to pulse with her. Flames flickered higher. Women began to dance, men clapped their hands, and even the stars seemed to shimmer brighter. But in the crowd, Zuri's eyes were cold. She saw not a celebration but rebellion, not beauty but danger. "If she can make the heavens tremble," she thought, "then she can take everything from me." And in that moment, something inside her twisted beyond return. That night, when the drums fell silent and the people slept, Zuri stood outside Asha's hut, staring at the young girl through the cracks of woven reeds. Asha slept peacefully, her hands resting on her drum. Zuri's fingers curled tight around a charm of bone and ash, a charm she had taken from the old witch who lived near the edge of the forest. The witch's words echoed in her mind, "If the drum is her soul, then silence will be her grave." The moon moved behind the clouds and a hush fell over Tembera. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Somewhere deep in the night, the first note of doom began to take shape, not from a drum, but from the silence that would soon swallow Asha whole. And as Zuri turned away from the sleeping girl, the air around the hut seemed to thrum with an invisible beat, faint, haunting, like a heart beginning to defend itself against what was to come. The spirits of the drums were already awake. They were listening. Morning came with a heavy stillness, the kind that made even birds forget to sing. The drums of Tembera, which usually greeted dawn with joy, remained silent. Zuri had begun her work before sunrise. She moved from house to house, her voice low and trembling with false fear. "The ancestors are displeased," she said, clutching her shawl as though afraid. "Did you not hear the storm last night? Did you not see how the river dried overnight? It is her music. Asha's drums have awakened the wrath of the old ones." The villagers, still half asleep, listened. Fear, once planted, grew quickly. The drought that had touched their fields, the dying leaves, the strange quiet of the animals, all seemed to agree with Zuri's words. She spoke of omens, of how the fire had burned blue during Asha's last performance, and how even the shadows had danced. "The ancestors are warning us," she said, tears glistening on her cheeks. "They demand silence, they demand her silence." By midday, whispers turned into calls for judgment. The drums that once united the village were now a symbol of unease. When Asha stepped out of her hut, the children who once followed her hid behind their mothers. The men who used to clap to her rhythms averted their eyes. Only the wind greeted her, carrying the heavy murmur of betrayal. She could feel something shifting in the air, something that had nothing to do with spirits but everything to do with fear. That afternoon, the council gathered under the baobab tree, the place where truth was supposed to be found. The king sat weakly on his stool, his skin pale from illness, his heart divided. Zuri stood beside him, her expression carved with false sorrow. The elders spoke first, their voices trembling with uncertainty. "Asha, daughter of the king, it is said that your songs bring misfortune. The rains have not come. The river retreats. What do you say to this?" Asha looked around, her eyes wide with disbelief. "My songs have always brought joy," she said softly. "The ancestors danced with us. The river has sung with us. How can you say they are angered by the very rhythm they blessed?" But Zuri stepped forward, holding a bowl of dry earth. "Then tell me, child of drums," she said, her tone sharp as a thorn, "why has the earth turned to dust beneath our feet? Why do the spirits no longer speak through the drums?" She let the earth fall through her fingers, the dust drifting like accusation. "It is because your hands no longer call blessings but curses." The crowd murmured. Someone shouted, "She must be tested." Another voice cried, "If her drums truly please the ancestors, let them protect her." Fear thickened like smoke. The king's gaze fell to the ground. His silence was worse than any word. Asha's heart broke quietly inside her chest. "Father," she whispered, "you know my heart. You know my music." But the king only closed his eyes, the weight of the people's voices pressing upon him like a mountain. "Until the spirits speak otherwise," he said slowly, "you must be silenced." Asha's breath caught. "Silenced?" she echoed. But before she could speak again, the guards stepped forward. Their faces were cold, their movements mechanical. They bound her wrists with cords of braided palm, and the villagers watched, their eyes reflecting guilt they would never voice. They led her to the edge of Tembra, where the forest thickened and the air grew heavy. There stood the hut of silence, a place no one dared to enter. It was said that inside, even breath refused to make a sound. The hut was surrounded by old drums, blackened with age and symbols carved deep into their sides. Some said these drums once belonged to the spirits of the first drummers, men who had challenged the gods with sound and were cursed to eternal quiet. As the guards pushed Asha inside, she turned one last time toward the village. "You cannot silence the truth," she said, her voice trembling but strong. "The spirits hear everything." But Zuri only smiled, a thin, cold smile that did not reach her eyes. The door was sealed with mud and woven reeds. Darkness swallowed Asha whole. No wind, no echo, no life, only the weight of silence pressing against her ears until she could hear her own heartbeat like a drum trapped inside her chest. The air was thick with the scent of old wood and forgotten prayers. Around her, the cursed drums sat like watchers, silent, ancient, waiting. Outside, the villagers scattered, eager to forget what they had done. Zuri walked home slowly, her heart pounding with victory. She had silenced the girl who had stolen her place, the voice that had once filled every ear. She believed it was over. But deep inside the hut of silence, something stirred. Asha, alone and trembling, placed her hands on one of the old drums. It was cold beneath her touch, but it pulsed faintly, as if something within it still lived. Her fingers moved instinctively, tracing the carvings. A whisper, faint like wind against glass, brushed her ear. The drums were listening again. And though no sound escaped that cursed place, something had begun to awaken, something older than Zuri's lies, older even than Tembra's fear. The silence itself had begun to hum. The first night inside the hut of silence was darker than any Asha had ever known. It wasn't just the absence of light, it was the absence of sound. Even her breath, even her heartbeat, seemed stolen from her the moment she exhaled. The air felt alive with the memory of screams that had once tried to escape, only to be swallowed whole by the curse. When she tried to speak, her lips moved but nothing came. No whisper, no cry. The silence devoured her words before they could live. Panic rose in her chest like fire. She screamed, but the hut remained still, the world beyond deaf to her pain. Her voice was gone, buried beneath the weight of something ancient and cruel. She pressed her palms against the walls, rough, splintered wood slick with cold, but they gave no answer. Not even the echo of her touch replied. She fell to her knees, trembling. For the first time the girl who had made the earth dance felt completely alone. Outside, the village slept easily, content in its belief that the curse had been contained. But inside that small, suffocating prison time moved differently. The second day she stopped trying to speak. Her throat burned from the effort. Her body weakened without food, without water, yet her heartbeat persisted, steady and slow, like a rhythm she could no longer play aloud. When her tears fell, they made no sound upon the dirt. Only a faint shimmer lingered where they landed, as though the earth itself still loved her enough to remember. At dusk, faint light crept through the cracks of the hut, painting thin lines across the floor. Dust floated like tiny spirits in the golden air. For a moment she imagined she could hear them moving, not with her ears but with her soul. She tilted her head, focusing, and beneath the silence she felt it, a pulse, faint and slow, almost like breathing. It came from the drums. The cursed drums that circled the hut, said to hold the trapped souls of long-dead drummers, began to hum with life. The vibrations were soft, so soft she thought she imagined them. But when she pressed her hand against the ground, the rhythm echoed up her bones. The drums remembered her. That night she lay on the dirt, her body weak but her spirit awake. Her heart beat in rhythm, thump 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 thump, and the drums answered faintly at first, then stronger. She didn't hear the sound, she felt it. The air trembled around her. She began to move her hands slowly in the air, mimicking the pattern of a rhythm she once played at festivals, the song of calling, the one that summoned joy to the fields. Each motion of her hand seemed to stir something outside her body, something invisible and watching. The drums quivered in response. Their surfaces, cracked, dry and ancient, began to pulse with faint light, as if embers of memory were flickering back to life. The night stretched endlessly. Hunger clawed at her belly. Sleep came only in short, shivering moments. But whenever she awoke, the vibrations were still there, stronger each time. Sometimes she could feel them even through her spine, as though her body itself had become part of the rhythm. By the fifth night she began to understand the silence. It was not absence, it was waiting. The air was holding its breath, listening for something to be reborn. She closed her eyes and placed her palms against the nearest drum. Its surface was cool and coarse beneath her touch, but beneath that stillness she felt a deep, ancient sorrow, the souls trapped within yearning for sound again. She pressed harder, tears spilling down her face. Her heart beat faster, her hands moving to that rhythm instinctively, silently drumming the air. Thump 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 thump. The vibrations grew stronger. The hut shivered. Dust fell from the ceiling like rain. For a brief second, Asha thought she heard the faintest echo, not in her ears but in her bones. It was her heartbeat, multiplied, amplified, echoing from every drum around her. She smiled weakly. For the first time since her imprisonment, she wasn't afraid. The spirits had not forgotten her, they were only waiting for her to remember them. The nights passed and with each one the drums grew more restless. The silence began to break, not with noise but with feeling. Asha could sense the forest outside, the heartbeat of the world returning to her through unseen threads of rhythm. On the seventh night, as the moonlight slipped through the cracks like silver smoke, Asha pressed both palms against the ground and felt the entire hut breathe. The earth trembled beneath her hands, the air throbbed, and in that moment her heart and the drums beat as one. No words. No sound. Just rhythm, ancient, divine, unstoppable. And though the village slept, those closest to the forest turned uneasily in their dreams, hearing faint, impossible drumming from somewhere deep within the night. The night the drums awakened, the sky itself seemed to hold its breath. The moon hung low, swollen and pale, its silver light spilling through the cracks of the hut of silence like liquid glass. Outside, the air was thick with stillness, the kind that comes before storms or miracles. Then, far off in the distance, thunder rumbled once, deep and low, like the growl of an ancient beast remembering its power. Inside the hut, Asha stirred. She had been neither fully awake nor fully dreaming for days. Her body was frail, her lips cracked, her eyes sunken, yet her spirit pulsed stronger than ever. She felt it beneath her fingertips, the heartbeat of the drums, no longer faint or hesitant but steady, sure and alive. The wind shifted. Moonlight struck the nearest drum and for the first time in generations it answered. A low, trembling thud broke through the silence. It was soft, but in a village where no sound had come from that cursed hut in years, it might as well have been thunder. Then came another beat, thump thump, deep, slow and full of sorrow. The air trembled. Dust rose from the floor in spirals. Asha's heart leapt in rhythm, her hands twitching to the old patterns she once knew by instinct. Though her lips still could not form sound, her soul sang. And the drums, the sacred, forsaken drums, carried her song for her. They began to beat faster, louder, shaking the wooden walls until they groaned. The moonlight flared brighter, illuminating Asha's face, pale, trembling, radiant with something divine. Her eyes reflected the silver light, and her tears shimmered as they fell. The hut became a vessel, and her pain became its rhythm. Outside, the first awake were the elders, startled by the strange echo that rolled across the fields. It wasn't wind. It wasn't thunder. It was music, the forbidden kind. Soon others awoke, men, women, children, stepping out of their huts into the cold night. The sound came clearer now, drums, many of them, rising and falling in haunting unity. But no hand struck them. Someone whispered, trembling, "The cursed drums, they beat again." The people turned toward the hut of silence. It stood on the edge of the village, its roof crooked, its doorway sealed with old charms. But tonight, the charms glowed faintly, cracks of light pulsing from within. Then between the beats they heard something else, faint but unmistakable. A voice. A woman's voice. It rose with the rhythm of the drums, soft and sorrowful, winding through the air like smoke. The villagers froze, unable to breathe. The song was not sung with words but with pain, a melody that carried grief, betrayal, and something older than either. It filled the night like a memory the world had tried to bury. "The spirits," someone whispered. "They've awakened her." Inside, Asha was unaware of the panic she had unleashed. She could feel the voice returning, not from her throat, but from the air around her, from the drums that pulsed with her heartbeat. Each beat pulled sound from her silence, shaping it into song. The drums answered her sorrow, filling the spaces where her words should have been. The walls of the hut trembled under the power of it, dust raining down, the air shimmering as if alive. The villagers gathered closer, afraid yet drawn to the sound. Some wept without knowing why. Children clung to their mothers. The old drummer, Baba Kofi, who had once taught Asha as a child, fell to his knees. He whispered through tears, "It's her rhythm." Only she played that beat, the rhythm of life itself. The song grew louder, rising and falling with the rolling thunder. The clouds split open, spilling silver light across Tembra. In that glow, the hut looked less like a prison and more like a shrine. Then the door cracked. The people gasped as beams of light burst from the seams of the hut, painting the ground with silver veins. The drums pounded in unison, fierce and beautiful. Each strike seemed to shake the world awake. Asha's spirit was no longer bound. Her body, weak as it was, swayed to the rhythm, her hands moving in slow, deliberate motions. Gestures of command, not desperation. The drums obeyed, matching her unspoken will. She began to sing, or perhaps it was the night singing through her. Her melody was both a lament and a warning. It told of betrayal, of silence forced upon truth, and of the cost of forgetting the sacred balance. Outside, the villagers fell to their knees. Even Queen Zuri in her chamber awoke with a start. The sound reached her through the golden walls, the same song she had tried to bury. Her heartbeat quickened, her eyes darting toward the horizon. "No," she whispered, trembling. "It cannot be her." But it was. The thunder rolled again, closer this time as if answering the drums. Lightning tore across the sky, illuminating the village in blinding flashes. The air smelled of rain and renewal. The people began to murmur Asha's name. Those who had condemned her now wept openly, their guilt heavy upon them. The sound of the drums grew unbearable in its beauty, neither joyous nor mournful but true. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the rhythm stopped. The silence that followed was not the cursed kind, it was full, breathing, alive. The villagers waited, hearts pounding, until a final, single beat echoed from the hut, slow, deep, and powerful. It sounded like a promise. From within the cracks of the wooden door, a faint light still glowed. The people didn't dare approach. They knew, with awe and terror, that something divine had awakened in that place, something that would not be silenced again. The wind carried the rhythm before dawn broke, a deep pulse rising from the earth itself. In the village of Tembra, people awoke to trembling ground and whispers in the air. The sound wasn't like any drum they had known. It was older, heavier, as if the heartbeat of the ancestors had returned to claim what was lost. The mist crept in from the forest, glowing faintly under the moonlight, and from it came shapes, tall, regal, cloaked in the shimmer of the spirit world. The ancestors had returned. In the center of the forest clearing stood the spirits of drummers long forgotten. Men and women who once played for rain, for harvest, for life. Their eyes burned with light, their hands invisible but their rhythm unending. Each beat they struck shook through the trees, echoing in the bones of every villager. The elders fell to their knees, trembling, their mouths forming old prayers they had not spoken in years. Asha, within the hut of silence, felt it too, the air around her alive again. The drums that had been her only company now glowed faintly, lifting slightly from the ground as though guided by unseen hands. The rhythm that had begun as a whisper now surrounded her, vibrating through her chest. It was no longer sorrowful, it was powerful, alive, filled with voices that joined hers in unison. The ancestors were speaking through her pain, turning silence into a storm. In the village square, Zuri stumbled from her home, her eyes wide. The drums echoed her name between beats, Zuri, Zuri, the sound thick with accusation. Her heart pounded against her ribs, but the drums were louder. She tried to shout to the villagers that this was witchcraft, that the dead were angry because of Asha, but her voice broke into a rasp. The rhythm drowned her words, the spirits weaving her lies into dust. The mist thickened until it reached her doorstep. Zuri's hands shook as she backed away, but the earth beneath her trembled harder. Cracks spread across the ground, thin glowing lines of light, as if the ancestors' veins pulsed beneath the soil. The people of Tembra watched in horror and awe as the forest seemed to breathe, the trees bending as though bowing to a higher will. The air smelled of rain and smoke, the scent of ritual long lost. Then the voices came, not spoken but carried through the drums. Each beat told a story, of the girl born with the rhythm of the gods, of the jealousy that poisoned a mother's heart, of a silence that tried to cage a gift meant to heal. The villagers understood, not with their minds but with their souls. They saw visions flash before them, Asha singing under the full moon, her voice drawing life from the earth, Zuri whispering lies before the council, the locking of the hut of silence, the sorrow that spread with it. The spirits rose higher, their faces shifting between human and divine. They danced around the village, each movement striking sparks in the air. The rhythm became impossible to resist, even the children began to sway, tears streaking their faces. The ancestors were not just demanding justice, they were restoring balance. Zuri fell to her knees, clutching her head as the sound grew unbearable. She could feel her own heartbeat sinking with the drums, not in harmony but in guilt. Every lie, every cruel word she had spoken to Asha echoed back at her, amplified by the spirits. The air grew heavy, her home groaned as if alive. Then from the forest, a single drumbeat louder than all others silenced the world. The mist parted and through it stepped a form, Asha, her skin illuminated by moonlight, her eyes glowing with ancestral fire. She did not walk so much as glide, the rhythm carrying her forward. The drums bowed to her presence. Zuri gasped, her breath shallow. You should not be alive," she whispered. Asha did not speak, she raised her hand and the drums responded. The rhythm that filled the air was not vengeful, but full of sorrow and truth. The ancestors surrounded them both, forming a circle of light and sound. Through the beats, their message became clear. What was broken must be restored and what was silenced must sing again. The villagers wept. The children covered their ears but could still feel the rhythm in their hearts. Zuri's tears fell onto the earth, each drop sizzling like fire. She fell forward, sobbing, begging the spirits for mercy. But mercy was not hers to demand, only Asha could give it. Asha stepped closer. The drums slowed, their beats matching her pulse. Her voice finally returned, soft, resonant, echoing across time. "You took my song," she said. "But it was never mine alone. It belonged to the earth, to the ancestors, to every heart that beats in rhythm with truth. You silenced me but now, the silence speaks back." The wind howled and the mist surged. The drums erupted in a final crescendo, shaking every roof and soul in Tembra. The ancestors' forms began to fade, their task complete, but their rhythm remained, a promise carved into the air. The earth stilled. The mist thinned. When dawn came, Zuri lay before the hut, trembling, her voice gone, truly silenced. The villagers gathered around, faces pale, hearts heavy. From within the hut, Asha emerged, her steps slow but strong. She carried no anger, only light. The drums at her side beat softly without hands, their rhythm steady, eternal. And as the sun rose over Tembra, the ancestors' voices whispered on the breeze, "The drums will never forget." The moon hung low and swollen over Tembra that night, its light draping the village in silver fire. The air pulsed with rhythm, the sacred drums were still beating though no hands touched them. People stumbled from their homes, drawn by the sound that came not just from the forest, but from the very heart of their village, from the hut of silence itself. Mothers clutched their children, elders whispered prayers, and men carried torches though none dared move too close. The drums grew louder, the beats weaving words that no one understood, yet every heart knew what they meant. When they reached the hut, the villagers stopped in awe. The heavy wooden door, which had been sealed days ago, now stood open. Smoke rose like silver mist from within, curling upward as if carrying whispers to the heavens. Then they saw her. Asha stood in the doorway, bare feet on the threshold between darkness and light. The moon bathed her in its glow, and her skin shimmered faintly, as though dusted with the breath of the ancestors. Her eyes were luminous, reflecting both pain and power. No one spoke. Even the crickets had gone silent. The drums continued, slow and deep, echoing her heartbeat. Each thud rolled across the ground, through the roots into the bones of every living thing. Asha opened her mouth and a single note escaped, fragile, trembling, yet vast enough to shake the stars. It wasn't speech at first. It was a sound that carried grief, defiance, forgiveness, and the memory of every silence she had endured. The note became a word, and that word became rhythm. "I am here," she said, but it wasn't just her voice. The drums repeated the phrase, echoing it back until the village itself seemed to chant it. "I am here. I am here." The people fell to their knees. Some wept openly, others pressed their hands to their chests as though to keep their hearts from bursting. Asha stepped forward, the moonlight following her like a cloak. Every time her foot touched the ground, a soft beat answered, as if the earth was keeping time with her. Zuri appeared from the shadows at the edge of the crowd. Her hair was disheveled, her eyes wide and terrified. The drum's rhythm seemed to slow when she approached, heavy and dissonant. "This cannot be," she hissed. "You are cursed. The ancestors—" But she couldn't finish. Asha turned to her, tears glimmering like liquid silver. "No," she said softly, and the word rippled outward like thunder. "It was you who cursed yourself." The drums struck at her final syllable, a sharp, condemning beat that echoed in every heart. Zuri stumbled back, clutching her ears, but there was no escaping the sound. The villagers watched as Asha lifted her hands to the sky. The drums grew louder, more alive. She began to sing, a low, haunting melody that wove through the rhythm like smoke. It wasn't a song of revenge, it was a song of release. The words told of pain endured, of betrayal survived, of silence that could no longer contain the truth. With each verse, the drums responded, turning her voice into something greater, a harmony between the living and the dead, between her soul and the ancestors. Children peeked from behind their mothers' skirts, their small faces glowing in the moonlight. Even they could feel the power in her song. The animals stirred too. Dogs howled softly, owls fluttered from trees, and somewhere in the distance, the river began to murmur louder, as if it too wished to join. As Asha sang, the hut behind her began to tremble. The drums within it lifted into the air, spinning slowly, their surfaces glowing with patterns of light. The runes carved into their hides, forgotten symbols of protection and truth, blazed with energy. The people gasped as one of the drums burst open, spilling no dust or wood, but shimmering mist that took the shape of a woman, an ancestor, tall and radiant, with eyes like stars. She looked at Asha and smiled. "My daughter of rhythm," the spirit said, her voice soft but echoing through every heart. "You were never meant to be silent. You were meant to awaken what has long slept." Asha bowed her head, her tears falling freely. Each tear struck the ground with a faint chime, as though striking invisible strings. Where her tears fell, small blooms of light emerged, flowers that pulsed to the beat of the drums. The villagers stared, awestruck, as the entire clearing began to glow. Zuri fell to her knees, trembling. "Forgive me," she whispered. "I did not know." Asha turned toward her stepmother. Her expression held no hatred, only deep, weary sorrow. "You feared what you did not understand," she said. "But fear cannot bury truth. Even silence must one day break." She extended her hand. Zuri tried to reach for it, but the drums struck again, a sharp, final beat that sent a shock through the air. The ancestors' mist swirled around Zuri, lifting her gently but firmly from the ground. The villagers gasped. Zuri cried out as the light surrounded her, not to destroy her but to mark her. The glow wrapped around her throat, a symbol of the silence she had imposed, and then faded. When the mist cleared, she could no longer speak. Her lips moved but no sound came. Asha looked upon her with calm acceptance. "You will hear what silence sounds like," she said softly. and perhaps in time you will learn its mercy." Then she turned away. The drums quieted, leaving only a faint heartbeat rhythm beneath the night. The moonlight dimmed, and the ancestors' forms began to dissolve into the mist once more. Asha stood at the center of it all, glowing faintly, tears still wet on her cheeks, her voice blending perfectly with the drums in one last haunting verse. Her final note lingered long after she stopped singing. It drifted through Tembra into the forest, across the rivers, a promise that silence would never again rule the living. The villagers wept, bowing their heads. And as the wind carried her song into the dawn, it was said that every drum in Tembra, even those hidden away for generations, began to beat softly on their own as if whispering her name, Asha, Asha, the one who broke the silence. Zuri ran through the village like a shadow chased by thunder. Her robe caught on thorns, her hair tangled in branches, but she didn't dare look back. The drums were behind her. She could hear them, pounding in perfect rhythm with her racing heart. No one followed her, no one needed to. The sound itself was enough. It stalked her like a predator, a voice that was not made of breath but of memory, justice, and the rage of ancestors long silenced. She stumbled across the fields, her bare feet slicing against sharp stones. The moon hung high, vast and unblinking, and with every step she took, the drums grew louder. They weren't playing from the village anymore, they were inside her head, inside her bones. Boom, boom, boom. The rhythm was relentless, and with each beat came whispers, liar, betrayer, thief of voice. Stop, she screamed, but the sound of her own voice frightened her. It came out cracked, distant, as though the air itself rejected her words. I did what I had to. I only... The drums answered her denial with a deep, booming strike that echoed across the hills. She fell to her knees, clutching her ears, but there was no blocking it. The rhythm pulsed through her blood, vibrating in her chest, her fingers, her teeth. Even her heartbeat had surrendered to its rhythm. She crawled toward the forest's edge, gasping. Ancestors, forgive me, she cried, her breath ragged. Spare me from her curse. But the night answered only with rhythm, steady and merciless. The trees themselves seemed to sway in time with the beat. Every leaf quivered, every root hummed. Zuri pressed her hands against the earth, desperate to find stillness, but even the soil trembled. In her mind, flashes of Asha's face appeared, her eyes glowing beneath the moon, her lips forming the words Zuri had silenced. You feared what you did not understand, the memory echoed and the drums roared in agreement. Zuri screamed again, this time in pure terror. No. You're gone. You're gone, she shouted, but her words broke into sobs. She stumbled back toward her hut, thinking if she could just find her coins, her charms, her hidden relics of protection, she could stop this nightmare. She burst through the doorway, her breath coming in harsh, uneven gasps. Inside, the air was thick, heavy with smoke and the faint scent of burning herbs. She reached for a pouch of silver dust she used in her rituals, spilling it across the floor. But the moment the dust touched the ground, it shimmered and shifted, forming a faint outline, the shape of a drum. Zuri froze. The floorboards beneath her feet began to thrum. The walls quivered. The sound rose again, boom, 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 slower now, almost patient, almost mocking. She clutched her head, pressing her palms over her ears, but it was useless. The rhythm was not around her anymore, it was her. It pulsed behind her eyes, in the space between her ribs. Please, she whispered. Please, I was only protecting the village. She brought danger. The drums answered with another sharp strike, louder than thunder. Liar. Zuri fell to the floor, trembling. Her eyes darted to the small mirror she kept near her altar, a gift from the king before all this began. She crawled toward it, hoping for something familiar, something to remind her she was still human. But when she looked into the glass, she gasped. Her reflection rippled like water, her face blurring and reforming into Asha's glowing eyes. No, Zuri whispered. No, it's not real. Then the mirror cracked. Not from impact, not from pressure, it cracked from sound. The drums thundered once more and every piece of glass shattered, scattering light across the walls. Zuri screamed, curling into herself, but the fragments glowed faintly, each one pulsing to the rhythm, each shard whispering her name. Zuri? Zuri. She stumbled backward, knocking over a clay bowl filled with ashes. The dust rose around her, swirling like smoke. The rhythm grew faster, building to a fevered tempo. Her heart tried to match it but couldn't. It stuttered, then raced again. Sweat poured down her face as she backed against the wall. The whispers turned into voices now, dozens, maybe hundreds. They came from nowhere and everywhere. You silenced her, they said. You locked away her song. Now hear the silence you created. The air thickened until it felt like she was drowning in sound. Zuri clawed at her throat, unable to breathe. She tried to run again, but her legs refused to obey. The drums reached their peak, an impossible, furious crescendo that rattled the very air. Every drum in Tembera seemed to be beating in unison now, shaking the ground, making the stars tremble. And then silence. It was the kind of silence that was louder than noise. The kind that swallowed everything. The flames in her hut froze mid-flicker. The insects outside stopped chirping. The wind itself seemed to hold its breath. Zuri's body stood still in the middle of it all, her mouth slightly open, her eyes wide. She tried to scream, but nothing came out. Her lips moved soundlessly, like the shadows and dreams. Slowly, the silver dust around her began to rise again, curling around her in a ghostly spiral. It brushed her skin, shimmered, and then began to turn her gray. The villagers found her at dawn. The drums were quiet once more. A faint mist drifted from the forest, carrying with it the scent of rain and ash. When they entered Zuri's hut, they found her standing motionless, her face calm, her eyes closed, her entire body turned to fine gray dust. Only a faint outline of her remained, carved into the dirt where she had stood. Beside her, one of the sacred drums lay toppled, its surface cracked but still humming with the faintest echo of rhythm, the last breath of the song that had judged her. And when the wind passed through the village later that morning, it carried a sound no one could explain, a single ghostly beat, like a heartbeat made of memory. The elders said it was the ancestors sealing the curse's end. The children said it was Asha's rhythm watching over them. But the truth was simpler and deeper. The drums no longer feared silence. They had taught it to speak. And in that stillness, Zuri's name was erased, leaving behind only the echo of justice fulfilled. The first light of dawn spilled over Tembera like a soft blessing. The air was thick with dew, the scent of earth fresh after a long night of thunder and reckoning. The villagers gathered in silence, their eyes fixed on the hut that had once been feared, the hut of silence. Now it stood open to the sun, its walls breathing again, its shadows gone. From within came a faint rhythm, slow and steady, like the heartbeat of the world returning to life. Asha stepped out into the morning light. Her hair shimmered with streaks of gold and shadow, her skin glowing faintly where moonlight had once kissed her. The people fell to their knees, not out of fear but reverence. For the first time in generations they felt the weight of silence lift, replaced by something pure, ancient, and alive. The sacred drums, untouched by human hands, beat softly behind her, each pulse a whisper of forgiveness and truth. She looked at her people, the same ones who had once turned their backs on her, believing the lies of her stepmother. Yet there was no anger in her gaze, only calm strength. The spirits have spoken, she said softly, her voice carrying like wind through tall grass. And they have forgiven. But they do not forget. The elders bowed their heads, their faces wet with tears. Asha, one whispered, what do we do now that the drums live again? Asha turned toward the sacred circle where the oldest drums rested, their surfaces cracked, their rims worn from years of silence. She placed her palm on the nearest one. It shivered beneath her touch, responding to her heartbeat. We remember, she said. We listen. And we never let fear silence truth again. The villagers nodded, but none dared move. It was as if the whole of Tembera waited to exhale, waiting for the rhythm to tell them how to live again. Asha knelt by the drums, her fingers hovering just above their skin. For a moment there was stillness, then a low hum, a gentle vibration that seemed to rise from the earth itself. The drums began to play on their own, their tones blending with the morning breeze. Children gasped. Mothers clutched their babies. The sound wasn't loud, it was tender, like the first breath of a newborn, like the quiet forgiveness of rain after drought. Asha smiled faintly. They do not need hands, she said. They have hearts. The words spread through the crowd like sunlight across water. The villagers began to move closer, forming a circle around the drums. One by one they knelt, placing their palms on the earth. They could feel it, the rhythm beneath their hands, the same pulse that lived inside their chests. It was the beat of the ancestors, the reminder that spirit and song had never truly left them. Days turned into weeks and Tembera changed. Where there had been fear there was now song. Every evening the people gathered by the riverbank to drum, not out of ritual but out of joy. Asha taught them how to listen before they played, how to hear the voice of the wind, the murmur of the trees, the sigh of the river. All sound, she said, is the earth speaking. And when you drum you answer her. The young ones called her Mother of Rhythm, and even the elders spoke her name with reverence. But Asha never claimed a title. She said she was only the messenger, a bridge between the living and the unseen. The drums that once haunted the night now guided the dawn. Their sound carried through the valleys, calling to distant villages, inviting them to remember their own forgotten songs. Soon, people traveled from far and wide to see the miracle of Tembra, a place where music moved without hands, where truth beat louder than lies. One afternoon, as the sun bled gold over the horizon, Asha stood before the gathered crowd. The drums surrounded her, glowing faintly in the light. She raised her hand and the rhythm softened, until it was nothing more than a whisper. "There is power in sound," she said, her voice calm but strong. "But there is also power in silence. The two are not enemies. They are one. Sound gives voice to truth, and silence gives it meaning. Remember this: when the world tries to silence you, listen closely. The spirit within you will find another way to speak." The people murmured, their hearts heavy with understanding. Asha smiled faintly and turned toward the sunrise. "Once these drums were feared," she continued. "Now they will teach. They will remind us that we are never voiceless, not when our hearts still beat." She lifted her hands and the rhythm returned, slow, deep, eternal. The villagers joined in, some humming softly, others letting tears fall freely. Even the wind seemed to hum along, weaving its way through the drums and voices, carrying the sound far beyond the hills. As the sun rose higher, its light touched the hut, the river, and the fields that had once withered in sorrow. Everywhere it touched, life stirred, leaves unfurling, flowers blooming, birds returning to sing. The rhythm had become a blessing. Asha looked toward the horizon where light met shadow. Her heart was full, not of pride but of peace. She could feel the ancestors watching, their presence warm and approving. "We have learned," she whispered, "and we will not forget." Behind her, the drums continued their gentle beat, a rhythm that seemed endless. The people of Tembra would say later that the drums never truly stopped. They only rested between heartbeats, waiting for the next soul brave enough to listen. And when night fell again and the stars crowned the sky, the drums still pulsed softly in the distance, keeping time with the heartbeat of the world. At dawn, Asha stood alone on the village hill, facing the rising sun. The light washed over her, gilding her skin, her eyes glowing like amber. Behind her, the sacred drums beat faintly, no hands upon them, only the will of the spirits and the truth she had restored. The rhythm echoed through the valley, through the river, through the wind that carried her name. Asha smiled and whispered, "The song lives on." And as the sun climbed higher, the drums continued to play, soft, steady, eternal, a reminder to all who heard them that no voice once born of truth could ever truly die.